Hello and welcome to today's ACM 6 of webinar. This webcast is a part of ACM 6 of commitment to provide value to its current and future members. The ACM 6 of webinar series features speakers from the Future of Software Engineering track at the International Conference of Engineering, as well as select keynote speakers and distinguished paper authors. I am Pekka Abrahamsson, Professor of Software Engineering at the University of Jyväskylä in Finland, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today. Before we get started, I'd like to quickly mention a few housekeeping items shown on the slide in front of you. First, the slides will advance automatically throughout the event. On the bottom panel, you will find a number of additional widgets and resources. If you are experiencing problems with slides or audio, press F5 key in Windows, Command+R on a Mac, or refresh the browser on mobile devices. Or you can close and relaunch the presentation. To control volume, adjust the master volume on your computer. If you have questions during this webinar, please type them into Q&A box at any time during the webinar and click the submit button. At the end of the presentation, we will have time to respond to questions. This session is being recorded and will be archived. You will receive an automatic email notification when it becomes available. Today's presentation is Better Scrum with Essence by Ivar Jacobson and Jeff Sutherland. Ivar Jacobson received his PhD in computer science from KTH Royal Institute of Technology. Ivar has authored 10 books, published more than 100 papers, and is a frequent keynote speaker at conferences around the world. Ivar is one of the 3 original developers of the Unified Modeling Language. Ivar founded his current company, Ivar Jacobson International, which since 2004 has been focused on using methods and tools in a smart, superlight, and agile way. This work resulted in that Ivar became founder and the leader of a worldwide network, CMAT, which has the mission to revolutionize software development based on a kernel of software engineering. The kernel has been realized as a formal OMG standard called the Essence. Jeff Sutherland is the inventor and co-creator of Scrum. Jeff has started his career as a fighter pilot in the US Air Force, where he achieved Top Gun status in 1967. He received his doctoral degree in the medical school of the University of Colorado. He has been VP or engineering and CTO or CEO of 11 software companies. He started the first Scrum in 1993 and worked with Ken Weber to emerge Scrum as a formal process at Uppsala 95. Today, Jeff is the chairman of the Scrum Foundation and agile coach to OpenView Venture Partners. Jeff has over 30 years of hands-on team building experience. It's truly an honor to be here together with Ivar and Jeff today. Ivar and Jeff, without further ado, take it away.
Jeff Sutherland here. I started working with Ivar several years ago. When we got together, he said, "You know, Jeff, we really should put Scrum in the Essence Cards, which is an international standard for defining methodologies." And we began our work together. Today, we're going to talk about Scrum itself, the current state of Scrum. Ivar will talk about the Essence the cards and the thought behind Essence. I'll then talk a little bit about Scrum Essentials, how to apply Scrum to Essence, and then we'll go beyond Scrum and Essence, what we think is going to be in the future. And we're going to start off by just a few words about Scrum. Scrum is a simple framework, has 3 roles: product owner, Scrum Master, and team. It has 3 artifacts. I've called them social artifacts on this document because they're all artifacts that are to be socialized, to be visible. Everyone, product backlog, sprint backlog, which is a piece of work done inside the sprint, and the increment, which is the deliverable at the end of a sprint. And there are 5 key events that drive the Scrum process. Backlog refinement, getting the backlog items in a ready state for execution. Sprint planning at the beginning of a sprint, which is never more than a month. Most sprints today are 2 weeks or less. Many are 1 week. We do a short sprint planning for the week on the team I'm on. We meet every day in a daily Scrum. At the end of the sprint, we have our sprint review where stakeholders look at the increment of product that's delivered, provide feedback, and then the team goes into a retrospective to improve the process. So this simple framework works really well. The next slide kind of shows the essence card picture of that framework. And it will come up in about a second. You'll see all the roles, the artifacts. What the essence card adds is there are certain principles and values that are essential for a Scrum implementation. The Scrum pillars are transparency. Everything needs to be visible so that we can inspect it and then adapt the process. There's a set of Scrum values that are essential to create an environment, openness, transparency, respect for people so that people will be open, really getting focus and commitment of the team to execute. Scrum is based on self-organization in the sense that teams are autonomous. They work off the product owner's backlog, but they decide what to do and how long it's going to take to do, and the teams are cross-functional. Now, lots of times people ask me, okay, where is Scrum working well? Okay, well, first of all, there are many companies in the world doing agile transformations right now, many, many thousands of companies. And the latest data published in Forbes says 77% of those agile transformations are Scrum. Okay, so most of what is agile out there is Scrum. And if you look at the leading companies in the world, depending on which day of the week it is, either Apple, Microsoft, or Amazon is worth more than $1 trillion, and they're the leader. And Microsoft, Ken Schwaber and I started working with in 2005. And now their entire development organization can deliver every day, multiple times a day. Amazon, we work with Amazon, has 3,300 Scrum teams. They can deliver to production more than once a second. And Apple is very secretive about their process, but I've had many Apple people in my training, and they tell me, Jeff, Apple does Scrum by the book, by your book, the red book, Scrum the art of doing twice the work in half the time. And that is why Apple always delivers on time. So the leading companies are all Scrum companies. Even if you throw Alphabet and Facebook in there, there's a great paper on Google implementing Scrum in AdWords, which makes about 95% of the profit from Google comes from AdWords. And you can see videos of Facebook Scrum teams on the web. So unless you're doing Scrum, you're going to have a hard problem competing with the leading Scrum organizations in the world because they can go a lot faster. In the next slide, I'm going to show you the relationship between the speed and quality of delivery of a really good Scrum compared to traditional project management. So, for example, at Saab Technologies, they do Scrum to build a fighter aircraft, probably the most complex product that we see being used for Scrum today. They have about 2,500 people in one large Scrum at scale. And they deliver a new release of the fighter jet every 6 months, and every release is faster, lighter, and cheaper. And Aviation Week says it's the best airplane in the world. Recently, the U.S. Marines published a paper in the Marine Gazette on 2 battalions of Marines which had implemented Scrum. One battalion increased productivity by 400%, the other by 700%. So U.S. Marines are going 4 to 7 times faster using Scrum. But you can do even better than that. Schlumberger is a big oil services company. After a year of doing Scrum, the person responsible for metrics for that company said they're going 11 times faster. And over at Intel, the leader of a division of 500 Scrum teams, they tell me they're going 18 times faster. They've got really good metrics. So Scrum can really power up an organization and make them formidable in competitors in the business world. Let's look at where Scrum comes from. On the next slide, I'll go into a little bit of the background. This is the 1950s. Taiichi Ohno published his book on the Toyota production system. Okay. Two professors, Nanaka and Takeuchi, were looking at lean hardware companies, and they wrote a paper published in 1986 in the Harvard Business Review on the best teams in the world, which said they reminded them of the game of rugby. They were working so closely together, and they said, we're going to call this Scrum project management. So what Taiichi Ohno was doing was Scrum project management. And we took the name Scrum from that paper. And in the 1990s, Ken Schwaber and I published the first paper on Scrum that has now evolved into the Scrum Guide, which we maintain and update on a regular basis. The Scrum Guide is the definition of Scrum, and in 2001, Ken and I, also Mike Beadle joined us. The first company that did Scrum totally was Mike Beadle's company. We were the three Scrum guys at the Agile Manifesto meeting, along with four of the founders of Extreme Programming. And at the time, Scrum and XP were the only widely deployed processes with many hundreds of teams in action. And so you could view Scrum and Extreme Programming as the parents of the Agile Manifesto, which is a set of values that all the Agile processes hold: customer collaboration, individual interaction, responding to change, and working software. But to implement it really well, as I said, 77% of the Agile implementations of the world are Scrum. And to do Scrum well is described in the book that published recently, Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. And it turns out to implement Scrum well, you not only need to understand the Scrum Guide, you need to have a lean implementation. So you need to understand a little bit about lean. You need to implement certain patterns for high performance, and you need to be able to scale Scrum. So these are the things that we're working on today, really scaling Scrum. And if we look at how well Scrum is working in industry in the next slide, you'll see that the Standish Group is taking hundreds of thousands of projects with extensive data, split them into traditional and Agile. And what you see is that success rate in Agile projects is 42% compared to 26% in traditional waterfall projects. But the challenged, meaning late, over budget with unhappy customers, is 50% for Agile projects, and the failure rate is 8%, much lower than traditional, but still 58% of Scrum has unhappy customers. So there are some real problems in the industry in the implementation of Scrum. So this is what we want to use Essence to help fix. We know exactly what makes Scrum fail today. Scrum is designed to be fast, easy, and fun, but to do that, you need small, stable, dedicated teams. You need ready backlogs. You need teams collaborating together, a pattern we call swarming. You need to deal with interruptions, manage interruptions during a sprint. You need to be constantly improving. We need a Kaizen, a process improvement every sprint. We need to be finishing that sprint cleanly, ideally early, with everything plan for the sprint, and the teams need to be autonomous. Means they are empowered. They decide how much they're going to do, and they decide how they're going to do it. And the Scrum that's not working has teams that are too big, the backlog is not good, they have high specialization, individual silos of information, no plans to deal with interruptions, no continuous improvement. They're not done at the end of the sprint and so forth. So it's pretty clear what doesn't work. And we're going to talk about how can Essence fix that or help fix it. So Ivar, over to you.
Thank you. Happy to meet all of you and to be able to talk about this subject that has interested me for so many years. I'm trying to get the slide to move forward, but maybe, okay, now I know. So 15 years ago, we were in the midst of a methods war. Methodologies were fighting with one another, and there was very little collaboration. There were thousands of published methods for software development, traditional as well as agile. The most popular methods were owned by gurus who were fighting with one another instead of collaborating. I personally lived through that during the period when we were working with rational unified process and all these other methodologies that were there at that time, before agile. In practice, methods had no common ground, no widely adopted standard. Basically, you could say almost the only thing the method shared was the alphabet. They had different definitions of common concepts. So if you learn one method, you still had to start all over learning any other methods. And methods were dead books with no guidance when actually working. That means that people may say they use the method, and this is true for today too, using the method, but they only apply one or two practices, the rest they do as they always had done. And so the methods war has not finished. It's still going on, and we don't get the benefits of all the ideas out there. So something needed to be done, and that was when we started working on Essence. In 2014, we got the Essence as a standard common ground for all methods. We have, this is for the first time in 50 years history of software engineering, we got something that we could share. It had two aspects, we can say. There are many different aspects, but this is one of them, the way of comparing. It's a technical and human. From a technical point of view, it guides people in what to do with a modern user experience using poker-sized cards. It focuses on what is essential. So if people learn the essentials, they can participate in a project. And just to get an idea, the essentials is really not a lot compared to what an expert knows, but it's enough to participate. It has two components. One is a very simple language, intuitive language to describe what actually you do and how you do it. And then there is this kernel, which includes elements, essential elements that we always have, always do, and always need in software development. On the human side, it is a thinking framework that inspires to conversations between the participants in the project. It has numerous placeholders for conversations that help people, to inspire people to work and help people to understand and so on. And software development is a set of serious interactive games, which makes it entertaining as well as inspiring and empower the participants. We have just today we are going to talk about particularly one practice, Scrum Essentials. And here you just get an idea. It's a deck of cards. I think it is about 23 cards that represents the whole Scrum Essentials. Jeff may correct me if I'm wrong, but something like that. So the cards have different roles. There are cards that tell you things to do. For instance, these things you always have to think about when you do a Scrum. Product backlog refinement, sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint review, and sprint retrospectives, which are activities. And as you see at the bottom, they all have a piece of text describing what it means. And then it tells what do you need to know when you do it, and what is the result of doing it, and also which competence you need, kind of competence you need, and what level of such competence to be able to do the job. You have things to work with, and the most important ones are things we need to progress in the work. We call them alphas, simply for that the reason that they really represent the key things, the most important things you have to work with. And so an alpha represents that. There was no other term that really represented it. And here we have a sprint is an alpha. It has to be progressed. It goes through states from one state to the other. And for every such state, you have a checklist that you need to proceed. There are also work products. In the Scrum case, there are these things: sprint goal, increment, sprint backlog, product backlog, and definition of done. And for each such work product, there is a level of detail that you have to or should decide on that you want to have. Here's an example of how you can play a game with it. This is a team that evaluates how well they are doing. And the green face represents good, red is bad, and then something in between. On the other axis, you have 3 different categories: very important, less important, and I think it says irrelevant. And you place the cards. These are very easy to move and round, so you can place them in these boxes. And based on what you have done, you then on to the right, for the people who look at it, you specify what you need to do to improve the way you work. So this is only one game. There are, in the Scrum case, we have identified 6 such games, I think, and there are many more to be developed, not yet developed, but identified. So the original value proposition of Essence, that is what we thought when we have done it and we have developed it, but not the end in any way. So the focus on the essentials. It makes it very easy to learn and to get people up to speed compared to if you have other approaches. They also learn more deeper. The modern user experience allow teams to play serious games. This I have already talked about, so it's a little bit of repetition. But here, practices are liberating from their methods. Every method has a number of practices which have been composed. It may not be clear which practices are in a method, but it can be they can be separated into the practices, and they can be described separately. And then teams can, with some restrictions mandated, select their own method by just composing practices from this ecosystem. So the idea of an ecosystem where you can find practices and make them available is really valuable. So with this, let's see what Jeff has to say about Scrum Essentials.
Okay, so I want to talk about how we're using Scrum Essentials in our training and consulting. And the next slide, as soon as I get the next slide up, we can talk about it. Every class that we're teaching now, it's been a little bit more of a challenge as we're doing remote classes, but certainly every in-person class, we have them do an exercise called Build Your Own Scrum. And to do that, they take the Scrum Essence cards and then they put them on a flip chart and they create a picture of what is Scrum, how does it work? And this slide has an example of one of those. We've done this now with thousands of people in many hundreds of companies. And we get very interesting feedback. So for example, one person, after every team builds their own Scrum, we have every team present to everyone else like a science fair. So everybody sees multiple Scrum implementations. And one Scrum leader said after we did this, I've been doing Scrum for 6 years, but I learned more new things in 1 hour with this exercise than in all the 6 years I've been doing Scrum. So these Essence cards flush out what is Scrum and what are people doing with it and how is it working. And we have extensive data now showing, okay, what parts of Scrum, there are actually 21 components, 21 cards, which parts are implemented well, which are implemented poorly, and which are implemented not at all. And on the average, we find that a third are implemented well, a third poorly, and a third not implemented at all. And so this fleshes out immediately why 58% of Scrum implementations are late, over budget, with unhappy customers. Not implementing pieces of Scrum is like trying to drive your car around town with a flat tire. And so Essence, first of all, immediately flushes out where the problems are, and then the next question is, how can we use Essence to fix it? And there are many different exercises we can do. One common problem is that you have a vendor-customer relationship, and who is responsible for what often causes big problems. And by laying out these cards on the table on all the pieces of Scrum, it says, okay, what is the customer responsible for? What is the vendor responsible for? And what do they have to jointly work on together? Helps really clarify these customer-vendor projects and increase the success rate significantly. Another good exercise for these cards is to look at what are people doing well and what are they not doing well? And then doing some analysis, like here we have the daily scrum where they think it needs to be improved. And sprint planning, sprint review, and sprint retrospective, they think it's okay, it's working. So then the question is, what do we need to do? What is the problem? Okay, so that the team's not seeing value in the daily scrum because typically if that's the perception of the team, it's not working, it's not being done properly. Product backlog refinement has a problem. If you come into a sprint without backlog in a ready state, we have multiple case studies showing that your production will be cut in half, at least in half, maybe more. So identifying those problems and then deciding what to do about it is Essence is a very good tool, and you can look at them at the activities. You can look at who's doing it, when it's done, where it's done, why it's done, how it's done, what process improvements you need to make, what working agreements you need to agree on and enforce, and in that way systematically start tuning up your Scrum implementation. Ivar has recently built a tool where we can do even more detailed analysis. So we can say, okay, as in essence, a requirement has different stages of implementation, and requirements, of course, in Scrum are product backlog items. They're conceptualized, they're bounded, they're coherent, they're acceptable for implementation. They're addressed by a team, and then they're fulfilled. Okay, so in this case, if they look at requirements for this team or set of teams, they find out having them coherent. Coherent means that they're shared, they're clear, conflicts are addressed, and so forth. There's a clear definition of the tool of what that means. They think they're only about 80% there. So that's going to start causing problems in product backlog refinement. So again, you can identify and plan on what you're going to be doing. You can track them in this tool. So the bottom line is that 58% of Scrum implementations fail to satisfy customers late and over budget. And Essence can quickly identify the cause of those failures. It can drill down into the components causing failures. It can identify specific parts of the components that are not working. It can identify process improvements, and we can apply some scientific analysis, straighten out poor agile thinking. Okay, we need to look at the data. So what about taking Essence and Scrum beyond where we are today? Let's look at what can be done in Scrum at Scale. Recently, we had a session accepted at Agile 2020. Unfortunately, Agile 2020 conference cannot be held because of the COVID problem. But we have a published paper up on the submission site on Quicken Loans. Quicken is the largest mortgage provider in the United States, probably the largest in the world, and they have implemented the Scaled Agile framework. They have 26 release teams, trains for 17,000 people. So one of the larger Scaled Agile framework implementations in the world. It's also one of the best in the world because what they found is that they could cut the average cycle time for feature development from 86 days to 42 days. So effectively cut it in half. From a Scrum point of view, that means velocity, production doubled. One of the release trains that was responsible for the whole front end of the mortgage loan system, the leader of that release train decided that he came and became a Scrum at Scale trainer. He went through our whole program, became a certified trainer, and then went back and tuned up his scaled agile framework with Scrum at Scale. And when he was done, it says in the paper exactly and specifically what he did tune up the scaled agile framework to actually make it go 340% better. So we took one of the best scaled agile framework implementations in the world, and we made it do almost twice the work in half the time by using Scrum at Scale to tune that framework. And I'm showing in this slide also that there are Scrum at Scale cards for Essence that can be very useful for implementing that. And we actually have the link, so if you want to look at those cards, you can go to that link. So back over to you, Ivar.
So beyond Essence, Essence is a standard. Even the standard is, of course, everything that is a standard is something that is basic and not specific. But to make it useful, you need to apply things on top of it. And this is, we have developed an app we call Essence in Practice to significantly increase the usability of Essence. We say we have basically new use cases for everyone. And that may be a little bit of an exaggeration, but look here. We have use cases for executives, for teams, for team members, and as I'll show soon, many more. For instance, the executive get use cases for building a forever learning organization, a systematic learning of the organization, standing on top of previous experience. Another important use case is moving software development from primarily being a craft to being an engineering discipline. And that is possible if you have a systematic and underlying theory to help you do things. It doesn't mean the theory is visible to its developers, but it's there so you can build tools that were not possible before. For the team level, it's there are several use cases, but the most important is raising the competence of a team. And on a team members level, it's learning the essentials is one use case, but as I said, there are many other use cases for the team member. We also have many more personas that benefit from Essence and Essence in Practice. The program manager, product manager, and project manager, teachers and researchers, methodologists. I mean, this is an example. Jeff has just told us that it helps him to make Scrum better. But let's zoom in on raising competence of teams. If you go and Google for primary reasons for failure of agile projects, you'll find many say that the lack of sufficient knowledge and experience is in applying basic agile techniques is one reason. So Essence in Practice helps with increasing knowledge and experience. When it comes to knowledge, you learn faster and more accurate a new practice. You get guidance in applying a new practice, any practice. So it's practices are not shelfware. They are not on the web that you look at it or in a book and then you go and do it. You actually get guidance in your daily work to do the job. Updating a practice is much faster. You get it very quickly and quickly learn what are the changes you want to do to practice. And when it comes to changing to new practices, there is support for that. When it comes to experience, you learn from an ecosystem of practices which is alive through local or global contributors. So it's not only learn from your own experience or you learn from the teams that are close to you. It's from an ecosystem. So what we address here is one use case only, namely acquisition of knowledge and experience, that is learning. If we look upon a team's competence journey, it can be said it follows an infinity loop, learning, delivery, learning, delivery. There, or if a learning side, we start to discover what are the practices you can use. We explore a practice, we adopt it. We then move over to the delivery cycle and plan, do and check, go back and adapt, and we go on for basically ever. To really understand what this means, I'd like to be a little bit concrete. The sweet spot for many tools supporting agile management, backlog-driven development, such as Jira, GitLab, Agile, is on the delivery cycle, and they are primarily in the execution phase, but also can be very useful in the other stations. The essence of practice is working during the learning cycle. That is where it's unique, but it also adds value in the delivery cycle, but on a different level than these other tools do. It works with, for instance, in the plan, we work with all requirements, for instance, in a sprint, whereas the Jira works with instances of backlog elements, for instance, user stories or defects and so on. So even if on this slide you see there is a big overlap, it's not a real overlap. It's they work and contribute in different ways in that area of overlap. So essence practice contributes in making people more competent. That is the objective of both practices in itself, but also in how they are adopted. So essence in practice supports the team to continually learn and deliver, not just deliver. That is the conclusion. So where can you learn more about this? There is a book that was published 8 months ago. It was designed for students, first-year students in software engineering. But it helps many people who really have long experience too, because it makes put the things into context and make the whole discipline more easy to understand, and understand the whole how all these methods actually that we have out there actually have a lot of in common. So more than 10 universities around the world are already teaching it. Pekka, my favorite professor, says my software engineering education in the future will be driven by essence. I'm very happy for that quote. He's not the only one. We have many similar quotes. And right now there is a community or forum to work together on developing training material for based Essence and modern software engineering, the book. And they have quizzes and exercises. There is also many other groups working with things related to the book. So we are happy to welcome you to what we think many people will think is the future, but we think it's here today. Now, we will try to answer some of your questions, but you are always welcome to contact us on these email addresses. If you have any questions and you don't get a response today, please contact us. And you also get free the slide deck we have just presented. You can get that as a PDF. So over to Pekka.
Yes, thank you, Ivar and Jeff. Let's go to the questions then. So our first question comes from Tom, and he asks, how you propose we use these cards virtually, since most teams are working from home?
We just did a Scrum at Scale class this morning, and we used Mural, a tool, and we put the cards in Mural. We had actually we had 5 teams in breakout rooms. We had them start working with the cards in Mural together as teams to try to do the same exercise we do if they were in person in a class. So one of the unique things about Scrum is that it works, if it's done properly, it works as well remotely as it does co-located. So for us, flipping everything to remote has not been a problem, other than making sure the technology works.
All right, let's go. The second question comes from Hector. He wants to know, where do the gathering and analysis of requirements happen in Scrum at Scale, so that speed can be so fast as in Amazon, Quicken, etc.?
Well, in Scrum at Scale, every team has a product owner, and sets of teams are formed into what we call a Scrum of Scrums, which has a chief product owner. There may be many of those that may roll up several levels. So a chief product owner is going to have a very high-level backlog. Here's the major features or components that we want to implement. Here's the roadmap of the rollout. And then the product owners at the team level working with that chief product owner flow backlog into their teams to make the chief product owners high-level backlog execute. And in Scrum, a product owner is a full-time job. They spend half the time with their customers. They spend half the time with the team explaining what needs to be done. The whole product ownership, very funny, I was at the Lean Enterprise Institute, and I asked the CEO, why does Lean always talking about all these Lean techniques, but they're never talking about Scrum? When Takeuchi and Nanaka look at Lean implementation, and all they talk about is Scrum. And the CEO of the Lean Enterprise would say, well, the Nanaka and Takeuchi are looking at new product development. They're looking at the creation of requirements, prioritization. All of this is done by their chief engineering function. And that is not widely understood. In fact, Taiichi Ohno did not widely publicize how they do that. But if you read, there's a new book out, a new Lean book out on really product backlog creation, how that all works. And they use different terminologies, but it is Scrum. So Scrum is going to do very similar to how do the chief engineers at Toyota develop the requirements for a new car. All
right, I think that we can go to the next question, and I guess this goes to Ivar. So Jose is asking, is there an Essence app, and does Essence integrate with UML?
So yes, there is an Essence app, and we have been working on this for 2.5 years, made many different usability tests and changed 3 times now, and we are just in the final tests with usability. It's not the testing the correctness of the software, it's the testing usability. We plan to launch it in the next couple of months, but before then we are working with big clients that actually use it. So we know that it really works well.
All right.
But we are happy
to next.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, we can go to the next question made by Andrew. What considerations for Scrum in regulated medical and pharmaceutical environments are recommended?
Okay, I ran the first FDA compliant project with Scrum back in 1997, and Ken Schwaber was the Scrum Master. And it was a radiology system. And so I said, okay, we're going to have our FDA expert work with the product owners and create a definition of done that said every story at the end of every sprint will be compliant with FDA requirements, which is mainly traceability. And we did that sprint to sprint. The nice thing about that is in the last sprint, the only thing you have to update is the documentation for the last stories built. And I carefully measured the cost of that. I was CTO of a company which is now GE Healthcare, and the cost of the overhead for FDA compliance was 95% less. And the FDA said we had better, more traceable documentation and a higher quality product and a record-breaking release time all at once.
All right, thank you. And then I guess the next question can go to both of you. Leonti is asking, what do you recommend to do if your customer does not embrace Agile?
I have some examples of that, Ivar, unless you want to talk about it.
Go for it, yeah.
The best I've ever seen is Systematic, a large consultancy, thousands of consultants in Denmark that does big defense projects both for the U.S. and Europe, big healthcare projects, a lot of government work, and they have totally implemented Scrum for the whole thing. It's basically a company run on Scrum at scale. The senior management team is a Scrum team. And I first started training their first Scrum Masters in 2006. And what they did was they ran, because they're a CMI-5 operation, so they can do a virtually perfect waterfall every time. And so what they did was drop in Scrum as a process improvement. The same project teams with the same requirements, when they flipped the Scrum switch on, the projects were delivered consistently at half the cost with 40% fewer defects. So they then turned around to every customer and they offered them 2 proposals. Here's the waterfall proposal, that's going to cost you $10 million. Here's the Scrum proposal, it costs you $5 million, and it's your choice. Virtually 100% of the customers wanted Scrum at half the cost. They pointed out in the contract, if you do that, there's certain things that you need to do as a customer, and if you don't, the contract automatically reverts to the waterfall at twice the cost. Within 1 year, virtually 100% of customers were Scrum. So it's not about convincing them, it's about giving them a bid that's half price. That will convince them.
So I have I have another example, Pekka.
Okay, you have an example, so go ahead.
We were asked by Fujitsu in the consulting organization outside Japan, and we were asked to help introduce their management team to Agile. They had 100 people coming from the top management in this, from the top and down, to learn about Agile, and that was in Tokyo. We were the first speakers in a 4-day conference that had to do about moving to an organization that was not driven by command and control, but by coaching. And we used the essence to describe 6 games that people played and learned about, and it had nothing to do with software development. It had to do with basically development in general. And that was extremely successful, so successful that Fujitsu wrote a blog about it and talked about it. So that was changing the top level people, because if you don't get them on board, it's very hard for the teams working lower down to really get through the barriers, the permafrost layer.
All right, I believe that we have time for one more question. Can we use Scrum for defect fixing and support other support activities in software lifecycle when we get requests ad hoc?
Yes, there are many help desk call centers have basically interrupt-driven requests. I work with a venture capital group. We have about almost 50 companies investing. I'm the agile coach for those companies. When they have problems, they sent me into a call center that was getting twice as many calls as they could handle. So I sat down with the support team, the chief operating officer. I said, okay, first of all, are your tickets prioritized properly? They said, well, it's first in, first out. I said, is that making the most money for your company? They said, no. I said, okay, we need someone who's going to prioritize them properly. 80% of your money comes from 20% of your customers. They need a better service level. Are the tickets ready for implementation? Meaning that you can cleanly implement them without having to go back and forth with the customer. Because we know in many implementations that is double the number of tickets they can deliver. Third, let's do a value stream map of your ticket process. And when we did, we found that there was a 2-hour wait time for feedback from the support manager before they could answer a customer's question. It made the process efficiency, if we run lean process efficiency on that, the process efficiency was down less than 10%. When we got the support manager to guarantee a 10-minute turnaround time for questions, we could drive the process efficiency over 50%, and that automatically doubled the speed. Within 6 months, we were dealing with twice as many calls in half the time. Half of the support people were freed up then to do actually upselling to customers, calling customers every day, finding out how they're doing and upselling. So to do that, you need to take essentially what a Kanban system, and you need to scrum it. That means you need somebody prioritizing. You need a facilitative team leader. In Scrum, we call it a Scrum Master. You need process improvement identified. You need small process improvement projects, which are, typically I say to the venture group, we want 10% of the support team on process improvement every day. And that way you could do twice the work in half the time for a help desk.
Thank you. I'm afraid we have run out of time today. I'd like to thank Ivar and Jeff again for this informative presentation and insightful answers to many of the questions. Special thanks to each of you for taking the time to attend and participate in today's webinar. This webinar was recorded and will be made available in a few days at 6of.org/resources webinars. You can find announcements on upcoming ACM and SIGSOFT webinars and other ATM activities as Learning ACM.org and SIGSOFT.org. On behalf of SIGSOFT, the speakers and myself, thanks again for joining us, and I hope you will join us again in the future. This concludes today's webinar.